October 1781. On a narrow spit of land where the York River meets the Chesapeake Bay, a British army of 8,000 men waits for rescue, trapped between the water and the woods. Their commander, General Charles Cornwallis, has dug in and fortified his position along the riverbank. He has sent word to New York, "Hold this position, and the Royal Navy will come." The Navy never comes. What happens instead is one of the most complete traps in military history. An army sealed off by land and sea, outmarched, outmaneuvered, and outfought by an unlikely coalition. This is the story of how George Washington, a French fleet, and a young Marquis named Lafayette worked together. Together they closed the door on the British Empire's hopes in America. This is the Siege of Yorktown. By 1778, the British High Command had a serious problem on their hands. Their northern strategy had collapsed at Saratoga, and France had now entered the war. London needed a new plan, and found one in the south, where loyalist support ran deep. The strategy worked at first. British forces captured Savannah, then Charleston, in a crushing American defeat. Cornwallis pushed north through the Carolinas, chasing a rebellion he believed was already broken. But the South fought back in ways London never planned for. At Kings Mountain, Loyalist forces were wiped out by American frontiersmen in a single afternoon. At Culpins, Daniel Morgan destroyed Cornwallis's best cavalry commander in under an hour. At Guilford Courthouse, Cornwallis technically won the field, but lost a quarter of his army. One British politician warned that the army couldn't survive many more victories like that. Bruised and low on supplies, Cornwallis marched north into Virginia, chasing a force he could never quite catch. Pause, music beat, EO 240. That smaller force belonged to the Marquis de Lafayette, young, sharp, and dangerously outnumbered. Not yet 24, he led roughly 3,000 men against a British force nearly 3 times that size. He knew a direct fight would be suicide, so he refused to give Cornwallis one. For months, Lafayette played a game of cat and mouse across the Virginia countryside. He retreated when he had to, struck when he could, always staying one step out of reach. Cornwallis reportedly grew so frustrated, he said the boy could not escape him. The boy did. Every single time. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't one decisive battle, but it was exactly what the cause needed. Every week Lafayette kept Cornwallis chasing shadows was a week Washington needed for a much bigger plan. Up in New York, Washington had spent most of 1781 planning a very different operation entirely. A joint assault with the French army under the Comte de Rochambeau, aimed at British-held New York City. Then, in August, a single letter changed everything. Admiral François de Grasse, commanding a French fleet in the Caribbean, announced he was sailing north. Not to New York, but to the Chesapeake Bay, exactly where Cornwallis was now stationed. It was the opening Washington needed. If the French fleet controlled those waters, the trap could close. Cornwallis wouldn't just be defeated, he'd be sealed off. No retreat, no resupply, no escape. The problem was distance. Washington's forces were near New York. Cornwallis was 400 miles south. If Clinton realized what was happening, he could reinforce Cornwallis before the trap ever closed. So Washington did what great commanders do when the odds favor deception. He lied. Washington ordered the construction of large encampments and bakeries near New York, all designed to be seen. They were decoys meant to convince Clinton that the attack on New York was still coming. Letters describing plans that were never real were deliberately allowed to fall into British hands. While Clinton waited for an attack that would never arrive, the real army was already moving. Nearly 7,000 American and French troops began a rapid, grueling march south toward Virginia. It remains one of the most impressive logistical feats of the entire Revolutionary War. An army moved hundreds of miles without the enemy ever realizing the true target, until too late. By mid-September, the pieces were falling into place. Washington's army was closing in by land, and out at sea, the second half of the trap was about to snap shut. On September 5th, 1781, a British fleet arrived off the Virginia coast, intending to relieve Cornwallis. Waiting for them was Admiral de Grasse's French fleet, already in position along the bay. The two sides fought for over 2 hours in what became known as the Battle of the Chesapeake. Neither side lost a ship, but the French fleet's positioning left the British in a losing tactical spot. After days of maneuvering, the damaged British fleet withdrew to New York for repairs. It was arguably one of the most consequential naval battles in American history, without a single American shot fired. The French Navy had just sealed Cornwallis's fate by sea, cutting off any hope of rescue. The trap now had two walls, Washington's army closing by land, de Grasse's fleet controlling the water. Cornwallis was now completely alone.